11 American presidents tried to break Cuba. Every single one failed. Trump just made an offer so extreme, so unprecedented, that even his own allies called it a colonial fantasy, and somehow Cuba hasn't fully walked away. Here's what's actually happening and why the next few weeks could permanently change the map of the Western Hemisphere. Stay with me, because the real story is not what the headlines are telling you. The offer came through back channels in late March, not through diplomats, not through an embassy, through intermediaries in Panama City, quiet, deniable, and deliberate. According to Reuters, citing 2 Cuban officials who spoke anonymously, the Trump administration delivered one message: apply for U.S. statehood, and within 90 days, the 67-year embargo ends. All of it. The travel ban, the remittance limits, the port restrictions that freeze out any ship that docks in Havana. Every sanction, every restriction, every economic wall built across 6 decades, gone. In return, Cuba dissolves its government. Havana becomes a state capital. Miguel Díaz-Canel steps down, and 11 million Cubans receive U.S. citizenship, social security numbers, and access to federal programs within 18 months. If you think that sounds impossible, you're right. But here's what makes this different from every other pressure campaign in history, and why you need to keep watching. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Cuba will break? I want to see where this audience stands before we go any further. Trump confirmed the offer himself at a rally in Tampa. "We could do a very friendly takeover of Cuba," he told the crowd. "They're starving down there. We'd treat them better than their own government ever did, and we'd finally have that beautiful coastline, that incredible real estate under American control." Cuba's foreign ministry rejected it within 72 hours. Their statement called it a colonialist fantasy that belongs in the 19th century, not the 21st. That rejection was public. What happened privately is the detail the headlines buried, and it changes everything. Cuban officials told Reuters they have weeks, not months. They are already privately exploring what a transition might look like. The government that publicly called the offer an insult has not walked away from the table. That gap between the public statement and the private conversation is where the real story lives. If this analysis is already showing you things the news isn't, hit like right now, so this reaches more people who deserve to know what's actually happening. Now here is the part that makes this offer different from 67 years of failed pressure. Trump did not just make a proposal, he built a trap first. On January 28th, he signed an executive order imposing what the administration calls an enhanced energy interdiction protocol. Any vessel carrying petroleum to Cuba faces sanctions, asset freezes, and a permanent ban from U.S. ports. The results were immediate and brutal. Within 3 weeks, oil shipments to Cuba dropped by 82%. Venezuela, which had been delivering roughly 55,000 barrels per day, cut deliveries to just 9,000 barrels daily by mid-February. Not out of solidarity with Washington, but out of fear of secondary sanctions hitting Caracas. Russia pulled back entirely after the Treasury Department sanctioned 2 Russian shipping firms on February 4th. The tankers stopped coming. Cuba's power grid began collapsing in waves. Blackouts stretched from 8 hours a day in Havana to 16 hours in rural provinces. Hospitals ran on backup generators that were running low on diesel. Surgeries were canceled. Pharmacies couldn't refrigerate insulin, and Trump made clear this was not an accident. "We're applying maximum pressure," he told Fox News. "Cuba's been stealing from us for 67 years. They're going to make a deal or they're going to suffer." The State Department disputes the word blockade. They argue Cuba can still trade with the rest of the world. Technically true. But when ships face sanctions for docking in Havana and Cuba has no hard currency to pay for imports anyway, the distinction becomes semantic. As one European diplomat told the BBC, this isn't just an embargo anymore. This is economic asphyxiation. And here is the question nobody in the mainstream press is asking directly. Is economic asphyxiation a legitimate tool of foreign policy, or is it collective punishment of a civilian population that never voted for its government? Hold that question. We'll come back to it. To understand why this pressure is working now when every previous attempt failed, you need to understand how completely Cuba's safety net has disappeared. The island's GDP contracted by 11% in 2025. That is not recession. That is collapse. Tourism revenue fell from $2.9 billion in 2019 to $370 million in 2025. Hotels in Varadero sit half empty. European tour operators stopped booking after repeated reports of food shortages at resorts. The human cost is not measured in statistics, it's measured in weight. The average Cuban lost 14 pounds last year, according to a University of Havana study the government tried to suppress, but that leaked online. Protein consumption is down 60% from 2020 levels. Families eat rice with sugar for dinner because there is nothing else. Chicken costs a week's salary on the black market. Immigration has surged to levels not seen since the Mariel boatlift. U.S. Customs and Border Protection recorded 401,000 Cuban arrivals between October 2024 and September 2025, out of a total population of 11 million. In percentage terms, it is the equivalent of 13 million Americans leaving the United States in a single year. And Cuba's government has no external patron strong enough to keep it alive. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. Venezuela is broken. China peaked its Cuban investments in 2018 and has been pulling back since. A planned nickel mining project was abandoned in 2023. Cuba owes China an estimated $4 billion in unpaid loans. Beijing has no appetite to throw more into a collapsing economy. Russia sends symbolic fuel shipments. Moscow will not risk a sanctions war with Washington over Havana. Cuba is alone, and Washington knows it. That context is why the statehood offer is not what it appears to be on the surface. This is not a serious policy proposal. Statehood requires a two-thirds vote in both chambers of Congress, a constitutional ratification process that would take years, and the consent of a population that just publicly rejected it. None of that is happening. The offer is a framing device, a ceiling. It establishes the maximum demand so that everything below it, economic reform, supervised elections, political transition, military withdrawal, looks like a reasonable concession by comparison. This is negotiation architecture. Start with the most extreme position imaginable. Then when you offer something lesser, it appears as compromise rather than pressure. The statehood proposal is not the destination. It is the anchor that makes the destination look moderate. And that mechanism is already working. Cuba is privately discussing transition frameworks while publicly calling the offer colonial. They are negotiating the terms of a lesser concession while pretending the conversation isn't happening. That private movement is the tell. The international response follows a pattern that tells you exactly how isolated Cuba's support truly is. The United Nations General Assembly has condemned the U.S. embargo every single year since 1992. Last year's vote was 187-2. Only the United States and Israel voted to maintain it. The UK, France, Germany, close American allies all voted against Washington. The EU called the embargo outdated. A German shipping company was fined $12 million for transporting medical supplies to Havana. Canadian Prime Minister Carney condemned the statehood proposal as neo-colonial. Mexico called it an insult to Latin American sovereignty. Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia issued a joint statement of rejection. Russia called it an open violation of international law. China said nothing. and China's silence is the most revealing response of all. Beijing could intervene. It has the economic capacity to stabilize Cuba's energy supply. It has chosen not to. That choice confirms what the numbers already show. No country with the means to change Cuba's trajectory is willing to pay the cost. 187 countries will vote against the embargo at the United Nations. 0 countries will send Cuba enough oil to keep its hospitals running. That gap between condemnation and action is the space where Trump's strategy operates. Words are easy. Tankers are not. There are 2 paths forward, and neither is clean. If Cuba accepts some version of the demands, not statehood, but the structural reforms Washington has been pushing through every back channel, the communist system dissolves over years. Private enterprise emerges. Political prisoners walk free. Elections occur. The embargo ends. Investment floods in. Tourism recovers. But Cuba has no institutions to manage that transition. No independent judiciary, no free press, no civil society organizations capable of operating at scale. The last country in this hemisphere that underwent a comparable transition without institutional preparation was Venezuela. The result was a decade of chaos, hyperinflation, and 7 million refugees. If Cuba refuses and the pressure continues, the trajectory is collapse rather than transition. Grid failure accelerates. Migration surges. The regime holds through security apparatus loyalty until it cannot hold anymore. And when it breaks, the break is uncontrolled. No transition plan, no institutional framework, no administration prepared to manage a failed state 90 miles from Florida. Either path leads to years of instability for 11 million people. The difference is whether that instability has a framework around it or not. Right now, neither Washington nor Havana has provided one, and 11 million people are absorbing the cost of that absence daily. Here is what we know with certainty. Trump offered to end a 67-year embargo in exchange for Cuban statehood. Cuba rejected it publicly within 72 hours. Oil shipments dropped 82% in 3 weeks following the interdiction order. GDP contracted 11% in a single year. The average Cuban lost 14 pounds last year. 411,000 people left the island in 12 months. 187 countries condemn the embargo at the United Nations. 0 countries have sent Cuba enough support to alter its trajectory. Cuban officials privately told Reuters they have weeks, not months. And here is what we do not know: whether the statehood proposal was ever serious or was always designed as a ceiling to anchor a lesser negotiation. Whether Cuba has the institutional capacity to survive a managed transition. Whether the 11 million people absorbing the cost of this standoff will ever have a meaningful voice in deciding its outcome. For 67 years, the embargo survived because neither side could break the other. Trump is betting he can break Cuba by cutting its fuel, collapsing its grid, and offering a demand so extreme that anything less looks like mercy. Cuba is betting it can survive long enough for the pressure to ease. One of them is wrong. And 14 pounds per person is what finding out costs. This is the question this entire situation builds toward. And it is not simple. Is what Washington is doing to Cuba justified if it ends in freedom for 11 million people? Or is freedom delivered through economic asphyxiation, through collapsed hospitals, unrefrigerated insulin, and families eating rice with sugar? Not freedom at all, but submission repackaged as liberation? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and both sides of this argument deserve to be heard. We analyze situations like this daily, so if you are not subscribed yet, now is the moment, because this story is not over. The next chapter is already forming, and you will not want to find out about it secondhand.